Did you hear about the bishop who said that you would never win a game? Well, this bishop happened to be called the opposite coloured bishop. I'm Grandmaster Max Illingworth, and in this video I'm going to show you a critical game from the 2020 Airthings Masters. This was the final match between Teimour Radjabov, strong Azerbaijani Grandmaster, winner of the 2019 World Cup, playing his way against Levon Aronian, Armenian Grandmaster and one of the strongest players never to become World Chess Champion, at least at the time I'm recording this. Maybe in 50 years' time, things will have changed. But in any case, let's get into this game where Radjabov managed to prove the pundits, the doubting Thomases wrong, and showed a supposedly dead-drawn position. Actually had a little bit more life to it after all. Let's get into the game. The game went d4, knight f6, c4, g6. Now, we typically know Aronian as a Rogozin player, but in this game he went back to one of his old loves, the Grunfeld defense. Now, if you're like most Grandmasters, scratching your head, not sure how on earth to fight for an advantage or set problems against a Grunfeld, well, Radjabov has an answer for you. He played the move bishop to g5, putting a lot of pressure on that d5 pawn. Black responded with knight to e4, counter-attacking the bishop. White retreated with bishop f4. We had takes, and after the captures, the move c5 was played, where we see Aronian try to get very resourceful and try to do about the automatic plan of bishop g7 and castling the king short. In this position, Radjabov played the move e3. We had knight to c6, again trying to be creative. And now after cd5 and queen d5, well, it looks like we got the standard exchange Grunfeld structure, but have a look at this rock-solid edifice on d4, backed up by that pawn chain. Yeah, good luck getting at that d4 pawn, bro. So in this position, the normal move would be to play knight to f3, but as we know, these Grandmasters have a quite creative tendency. You know, I still remember when Radjabov beat Garry Kasparov in 2003 in Linares where Peace Sacrifice, and the crowd went wild. Everyone called it the best game of the tournament, well, except for Kasparov, but in any case, you could see he was a little outvoted in this case. Well, in this position, Radjabov played the move of queen to f3. You could play queen b3 as well to go after the queen that way, but queen f3 has the idea that if black were to capture, we would take back, and you can see in that case that the white knight would just develop for free. The white basically gained a free tempo because black captured first. That's why Aronian decided to retreat the queen with queen d7, because even though the queen is getting in the way of his bishop developing, the queen for white is also getting in the way of the natural development of the knight. Therefore, Radjabov played bishop b5, thinking about moves like d5 to use the pin. Obviously, that's a pretty annoying threat, so a6 was played. We had bishop c6, queen c6, captures, knight to f3, bishop g7. On the one hand, white, you could say, has a slightly better pawn structure, because even if black does undouble the pawns, that c-pawn is isolated and will come under some fire. On the other hand, black does have the bishop pair, so for now the game hangs in the balance. But Radjabov decided to play the move knight e5 rather than a normal move like castling or taking the open file, because he wants to get at this pawn on c6. In the game, Aronian decided to actually play bishop f5. I was about to play bishop e5, but he decided he wanted to stop rook b1 first. Now, you might be wondering, well, Max, why didn't he just take the free pawn with knight c6? Did I say, the move bishop e4 can be played, and black is going to get that pawn back. And it makes sense. I mean, you want to trade off your double pawn for a healthy pawn to the opponents. So this would be a nice trade for black that also opens the position for his bishops in this case. So, you know, it's better to not take and to play f3. Now we see the idea of f3, that it threatens the pawn for real, but also prepares e4 to kick that bishop back. And here Aronian went for a somewhat radical approach. Now, what most Grunfeld players do is they love to sack a pawn. Even if they don't get full compensation, they just want to sack a pawn and get the active piece play and say, oh, I'm playing like Kasparov now and Bobby Fischer and all the greatest chess players of all time. So, in that sense, you know, at least if you play takes and c5, well, at least you manage to get your pawn sack after all. Though it is worth pointing out, white is not forced to take it. You know, it would be a whole other game. But Aronian decided to play bishop e5, and it's quite an interesting decision because with the opposite coloured bishops, you know, I introduced them at the start where the opposite coloured bishops say, oh, you'll never win while I'm on the board because opposite coloured bishops are the most drawish endings in all of chess. But, you know, hold up there, you know, hold the phone, hold my beer. And it turns out that actually when you have other pieces on the board, including having rooks on the board, Well, it turns out the opposite colored bishops actually give good winning chances for the stronger side. And the reason is that the opposite colored bishops are like an amplifier on that color complex, where this bishop has no rival, no opposition. So it means if white is able to take control of the game and take the initiative, then that's going to be a particularly powerful initiative because black won't be able to cover on the dark squares. And it works the other way around if black gets a big initiative on the light squares. Black decided to be a pest with bishop d3, saying, you're not going to castle this way. Now, some players, they would play castles long just to get their opponent to do what Korchnoi did and say, hey, you can't castle, your rook moved through check, at which you'd say, but rooks don't come under check. This isn't like the 1600s where you're meant to say garde when they attack their queen. You just take the queen for free and win the game. But instead, Radjabov played rook d1, realizing that he might want to put the king on a square other than c1, where it could, potentially get hit by a rook one of these days. Black played the move c4, anchoring the bishop. And now we have a little bit of a ghost in the camp where we can say, well, the bishop looks annoying, but we can play around it. Rook d2, king f7. I mean, just look at the power of this bishop on g3. You can see here that it's stopping black from challenging for the open file. And so even though the computer will tell you 0, 0, 0, talking in binary, the reality is from a human perspective, it's easier to play white. And in the game, Aronian started to go astray a little bit. His move rook hd8 was a good move. White played e4 saying, okay, you shut yourself in, well, you better make sure it's a permanent vacation because you're not getting out again. And this is where Aronian maybe lost his composure a little bit. Keep in mind that in this match that Radjabov had beaten Aronian in the previous mini-match of 4 games, 2.5, 1.5. That meant that since this was the game 2 of the second 4-game match, Aronian needed to win this match by 2.5, 1.5 or more in order to stay in and get to an Armageddon to decide the winner of the tournament. As it happened, of course, Aronian, well, if you're going to push for the win, maybe it's better to do it with the black piece than with the white pieces. I mean, he saw it after rook a7 that white would play the move bishop to b8. It's kind of important to play this move because if you don't, black is going to challenge that file. And we can see in a continuation like this, say if king f2 and play some random moves. Well, we see here that white now has the problem that black had before, that the bishop is covering the key square to take over that b file. So bishop b8 therefore makes more sense, and then we could just have a repetition of moves after bishop g3. Black really doesn't have a better option repeating one way or another. I guess if you could go rook d7, but then after bishop b8 you probably have to move the rook back anyway, just so your rook is not in prison for the rest of the game. But Aronian decided to play the move c5 instead. As I said, Grunfeld players, they love sacking pawns, but this one doesn't really work out. Because after dc5, the problem is that when you play rook ac8, which is what happened in the game, by the way, maybe not the best move, maybe e5 is a better try. Well, then after bishop f2, white simply hangs on to this extra pawn, which is a pass pawn, by the way. And we see that white's bishop kind of looks a bit more useful than black's. Well, black realized that, okay, if I'm going to be drowning, well, let's make sure that the opponent goes down with us. So we have the move f5, trying to free the prisoner on d3. White played the move ef5. Wacky moves like h for h5 will leave them for alpha 0. Normal people don't play these crazy chess. So ef5, gf5. And now a very human move by Radjabov in the move bishop e3. It's very logical to try to go king f2 and get your final piece into the game. But it does allow black to kind of bail out into a position that maybe offers better drawing chances than the one he's in now. I think maybe a better way to activate the rook is actually to play rook g1. And I mean, it looks like a very weird move, but the idea is that white is now ready to think about moves like g4 and try to get the rook active in this sort of way. And meanwhile, I can also play moves like rook b6 and go after the pawn. So I kind of like white's chances, and of course the computer likes to be mysterious and say, okay, let's just play this random move. But I guess, if you want to play f4 without allowing bishop e4, maybe there's something in that. So I guess it's a very deep prophylaxis, even for my grandmaster brain is a little bit disorienting. So okay, we had bishop e3. Black could have played e5, but maybe g3 is what he wanted to avoid, because it's kind of hard to get the pawns moving. E4, f4 kind of leaves the bishop even more trapped than it was before. So Aronian trades pawns with f4, bishop takes f4. And okay, black is still down to pawn, but at least his rooks are a bit more active than before. We had king f2, and maybe this is a moment where well, I was thinking where black could try to harass white, but it's actually very hard to do so. Because all of white's pawns are very safe, whereas the same can't really be said about black's pawns are all isolated. That's 4 weaknesses you can potentially target. I mean, if you thought the, McDonald's, turbo deal of, buy 4, get 100 free was good, well, wait till you see these 4 weaknesses. I mean, principle of 2 weaknesses, that's Soviet school, but 4 weaknesses, computer school. Anyway, going on with the game, we had rook to b5, and when we had rook takes b5, because obviously giving the file is not really what you want. And yeah, on the one hand, black's structure has improved a little bit. On the other hand, when you play a3, as Radjabov did, that pawn's going to be pretty safe. We had rook a8, rook a1 was played. Maybe it was better to defend with a less valuable piece, but really it doesn't matter at this point. We had rook to a6. Now, if I was Iranian, I'd probably think about king f6 and trying to trade some pawns, though still his life would be pretty difficult anyway. I guess one good thing is at least he's managed to have one less pawn island than he did before. So Radjabov realized, okay, my rook is, currently on our babysitting duty, looking after the little kids on a3. Well, the game continued with g4. Radjabov realized, okay, the queen side is kind of a no man's land. So let's go and just push some pawns on the king side. As Yasser likes to say, push them, baby. So we had king h5, d5, h5, e5. Black finally got a pawn moving. So bishop to e3 was played. I mean, what white would love is to get that bishop on b4 to defend the pawn, and then you free the rook to do the dirty work that it's trained for. Well, we had rook to a8, bishop to g5, now try and get in this way. And Iranian decided not to try and stop this, I guess because, well, if you go king e6, black still has some inroads like rook a2, and, you can eventually, one of these days, get the rook doing something useful. It'll take a bit of time, I guess, to, do all the maneuvers around, but, you'll get there in the end. Black has no counterplay, so I mean, it doesn't matter whether you take 2 moves or take, 49 moves. You're still going to get there regardless. Just don't, fall for the 50 move rule of not taking a capture or pushing a pawn. So after bishop h4, we had king d5. Maybe rook f8 and trying to go after this weak pawn might be a better try, but anyway, we had king e3. Black side to do the shuffle, king e6, rook a2. And, Iranian, well, we might remember actually that he, is married to Ariane Kawili, because I sort of figured like this Melbourne shuffle of the king moving back and forth. Anyway, the game continued with bishop to e7, and then we had king e6, bishop b4, and I guess he got sick of kind of moving the king back and forth. And if it was me playing Blitz, I would just do it just to annoy my opponent to say, I can just have a fortress, Carlsen may not believe in fortresses, but my computer does, just bluff him like it's poker. But instead, Iranian played h6. Unfortunately, I don't think h6 is that great. Even though it stops white playing g5, the problem is that that pawn is fixed on a dark square. So if that rook moves off that last rank, then suddenly bishop f5 will be something to contend with. Well, the game went rook b2, bishop h7. I mean, just admire the very strong technique of Radjabov in converting his advantage into a win. He realized that the bishop has already got sick of its babysitting duty on b4. The bishop is meant to be the head of the church. And, well, in this battle of the two popes, we see that this bishop is stronger. With bishop c5, white is ready to do some focus firing against that weak h6 pawn, remembering that principle of 2 weaknesses. And we're also attacking the b5 pawn, nice added bonus. I mean, if you play a move like rook b8, now we see the principle of 2 weaknesses in action with bishop e3. And, well, you can save one, but you can't save the other. It's like that, that Spider-Man movie, where, you have, like, the 2 trains and, like, the train like the girl, you have to choose like, do you save the people in the train or do you save the girl? And of course in the movies you can save both, but in chess, you can't break the rules like that. So we had king d5, bishop e3, king c6, and black is saying, well, if you take me, I'll take you. It turns out white is still winning anyway, even after this, because, well, you can still play bishop d2. And, connected pass pawns will take down a bishop when it's supported by the rook and king and all of that. However, in the game, Radjabov found an even better move. He played rook a2, defending the pawn on a3, and still asking black how he's going to defend this. Well, you might be wondering, Max, what if he plays the move rook to h8? Well, then we hit them from another line with a4. It's like in boxing, you do a little feint and then hit him on the other side. After ba4, rook a4, suddenly we've got a rook a6 lining up to take that yum-yum on h6. And then when you have those 2 connected pass pawns and plenty more to parlay with, well, then the game's in the bag. I mean, it's a position where I think you would beat Carlsen is white. You can always play a computer if you want to make sure, but let's continue with how this beautiful game concluded. So after e4, well, you could actually, if you want to, play f4. You know, just really rub salt in the wound and say, your bishop will be stuck in my territory the rest of the game as a prisoner of war, and the only way I'll let you free is if you resign. But instead, Radjabov took the bird in the hand with bishop h6, ef3, captures, and black got desperate. He played b4. Well, on the bright side, he did at least create a passed pawn in this game. The bad news is the bishop is covering it perfectly, and, 4 pawns should be enough to, promote to a queen and win the game. We had king e3, bishop b1, rook a1, c2, and now king f3, and, you might have got your bishop in, but unfortunately, it's not capture chess where you can't play rook b3 and take your own piece. So, after king b5, in this case, actually, Radjabov does have to be a little bit precise. If you let black get that king into square like b2, all hell breaks loose after that. So, what's the way for white to win that Radjabov played? Can you see it? And play like the winner of the 2020 Air Things Masters? Well, it turned out victory was indeed in the air for Radjabov because he found the amazing idea of a4 exclamation mark. The point being that rook a4 is not really on the menu because, well, these passed pawns are just going to run and black's bishop won't be able to stop it, and he will the king. So we had the other pawn be taken. And now the next key move, a5. The point being that you can't take that poison pawn because then after bishop d2, it's the rook that's on the menu. So the game concluded with rook a6. By the way, if king b3, you just kill all counterplay with bishop c1. And then you say, can't touch this, stop, hammer time. But instead, the game continued with rook a6. We had bishop c1. Now these pawns are ready to roll, baby. So we had rook f6, king g2, rook d6, a6. Black makes a threat, rook to d1. And Radjabov says, I don't care, my pawns are faster. So he played bishop to e3, because if you do try to promote to a queen, there is the small issue that after takes and takes that, white is not forced to commit harakiri with a7, bishop e4 check, and rook a1. If he moves the king first, then the pawn is going to run, and, well, a bishop and a rook is not enough to save the day here, and neither is the king for that matter. In the game, black played rook d3, we had a little repetition on our hands, and then finally after bishop h6 and rook d6, white says, okay, I've had enough fun, let's just play a7, rook h6, queens, and now a nice little tactic to end the game. Rook takes b1, and Aronian resigned here because after rook takes b1 and queen takes b1, we now do a lovely skewer, put a shrimp on the barbie with queen to b7. We take, and, black is going to lose from here. So there you have it. That's how Radjabov was able to prove the opposite colored bishops wrong, saying, you can never win when opposite colored bishops. But turns out with the rooks on the board, you certainly can. Radjabov did, even against one of the best players in the world. If you enjoyed this video and you learned a little something from it, then make sure to like. If you've been following my videos for a while, then certainly consider subscribing to stay up to date with more of my videos. Really excited to have you on board as one of my students in these lessons. Always great to help out a fellow chess lover wanting to get better at chess. Now, you can also check out the description as well to see some more special opportunities in order to learn even more from me each day. In any case, I will see you on the inside, and I will certainly see you in the next video.